Thank you. My name is Jerry Livingood, and as president of the board of Interweave, I would like to welcome you all here this evening. The name of our program is What Should News Be? And we are very grateful to the Summit Area Public Foundation for working with Interweave to put this together. Thank you very much.
I am Don Seo. I'm pastor here at Central. We're glad that you're here. Welcome to Central Presbyterian. Hope you feel at home.
Thank you so much, Don, and it's really a great pleasure to welcome all of you here. And I'd like to say thank you to Janet Haig. It's been terrific for NJ Arts News to team up with Interweave. I've so enjoyed many of the great events of Interweave, fascinating conversations they've presented in our community. So it's great to work on this. Thanks so much.
Ditto.
In this civic space, we are thrilled to have an opportunity for 5 very busy professionals to share ideas, and they'll be doing that as citizens, not necessarily as representatives of their organizations. And as you can see in your program, they represent a huge range of experience and backgrounds. So it's really a great honor to introduce them to you. Mary Alice Williams will go in reverse alphabetical order. Mary Alice is the anchor of NJTV's Nightly News, which is on Channel 23 and also at 6 p.m. on Channel 13. She has tremendous broadcasting work. It encompasses NBC, NBC News, CNN's New York Bureau, PBS, and also producing award-winning documentaries. She was born in Minneapolis and majored in English and Communications at Creighton University and lives in Montclair. And sometime this spring, she'll be broadcasting nightly from Newark. So welcome to Mary Alice.
And we have with us Kate Tomlinson, who has been publisher and editor-in-chief of New Jersey Magazine. She majored in government at Radcliffe, worked as a congressional aide, and as an economist for the U.S. International Trade Commission. She's born and raised in Morristown and was influenced early on by the sound and power of a printing press in action. She served on many nonprofit boards in the Summit area, including the NJ PAC Women's Association. Welcome, Kate.
Jim Schachter became vice president for news at WNYC in 2012 after 17 years at the New York Times with many different hats, including associate managing editor. He was born and raised in Glendale, California, majored in history at Columbia, and he said his favorite perch in the world would be Point Lobos State Park, Monterey. And his early media influence was watching the moon landing on his 10th birthday, July 20, 1969.
Thanks, Jim. Welcome. And we have Mark Ionno, who's a celebrated columnist for the Star Ledger. He's authored 3 books on New Jersey, including a guide to New Jersey's Revolutionary War Trail, which was recognized as one of New Jersey's greatest 101 books. He also has a novel entitled The Last Newspaperman. He was an English major and a wrestler while he was at Summit High School, and his strongest media memory is watching the Kennedy assassination coverage with his dad.
And Terry Baker is Executive VP of Presentation for Jazeera America. His past work includes producing for Current TV, Fox Business Network, CNN, ABC News, and WNBC TV, among others. And Terry was born and raised in Carroll County, Maryland, majored in broadcast journalism, played every intramural sport there is, and played trumpet and drums. And 2 of his passions now are traveling and his grandson, 9 months old. Congratulations, Terry. So off we go. We'll have kind of a round robin, and Janet will start with the first couple of questions.
So I wanted to begin by asking you, when did the idea of being in broadcasting, newspapers, publishing first come into focus for you? Or maybe when did you first say to yourself, wow, I'm actually doing this professionally? Would you want to start for us, Jim? Sure.
I first became interested when I was in high school and got myself involved in a letter writing campaign. I guess telling this story in a church is only appropriate. I was very upset about the fact that there was a Christian club at my public high school, and I led a campaign to get them thrown out of the building. and thereby discovered the power of the written word. They got the last laugh because the Supreme Court ultimately ruled that they had every right to be there. And I learned that I was much more interested in the words than in the activism, and have kind of gone from there.
Thanks, Jim.
I was involved in a family business. Some of you are probably familiar with the Daily Record of Morristown. That was a family business. I worked for my dad in the summer. And he had me writing obituaries. And this was not the glamour part of journalism. In fact, it was kind of dull. But I found the power of what I was writing in meeting sometimes with the families of the people that I had written about. And it was very impressive to me the extent to which they cared about having something about their loved one in the newspaper. So I very quickly changed my attitude.
I was, like all of us, I think, growing up in the 60s, watching the Kennedy assassination, the moon landings, the riots in cities across the country. It was such a formative time, and as someone who loves history, it was just riveting. And one day in probably my junior year of high school, I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to major in college, because I have no idea, like any other 16 or 17-year-old, and I happened to be watching Harry Reasoner do the news, and I'm like, that's it. And I decided to major in broadcast journalism, and the rest is history, as they say.
I was 8. It was my turn to do the dishes, and we had a little tiny square black and white, which was actually green, set. And it was PBS, and it was the Nuremberg trials. It was the Adolf Eichmann trial. I was 8. They didn't tell us about the Holocaust then. In fact, I didn't really know about it till I got to New York. But there it was for all to see. I went flying to my father, the psychiatrist, and said, "Why didn't you stop it?" He said, "We didn't know." I said, "But if you had known, you would have stopped it." And he said, "Yes." And I said, "So if people know bad things are going on, bad things can't happen." He said, "If you believe that, this is what you should do." And I started doing it for NBC News when I was 16 years old.
I love how these moments of clarity that everyone's talking about really ends up echoing in their professional life. These are television people and magazine people, but for me it was the newspaper, and I'm a columnist. And when I was a kid growing up here in town, for some strange circumstance, I knew 3 or 4 kids that died, that got killed in the most bizarre ways. And I remember reading about these things in the newspaper and sort of being taken by the fact that now that I read this, now I knew it really happened, rather than what just the kids were saying around the school, in school, in the schoolyard. And so I think that idea of being somebody on the forefront of knowing what was going on was really appealing to me, and that's how I stuck with it.
Great. Well, reviewing your many professional posts, past and present, when was your learning curve the steepest? Was there a time when new issues, new processes, new challenges, new decisions were just flying at you with the greatest frequency? So I'd like to start with Terry, and maybe we can go counterclockwise this time.
My learning curve was the steepest in the late 90s during the dot-com bubble, when I was working, I left ABC News to work on an internet startup, which today could have been YouTube if it had actually survived. But it didn't. And learning all of that was a huge learning curve because no one was doing video on the internet. Nobody even knew what the internet really was at that point. That was really the hardest part. That was really crazy.
The .com.
Yeah.
In my little world in magazines, that the technological changes accelerated, and that acceleration in the technological changes happened to coincide with the Great Recession, which of course set the business models of print journalism askew, as we could put it. But it's been an amazing evolution of the technology, which is great. We have new ways of reaching readers and of staying in touch and making a monthly magazine immediate through the internet. We have wonderful ways of getting ideas from our readers. We have immediate feedback. That's all the good stuff. The bad stuff is just the sheer learning curve. There's social media. There's a new social media expression every day, it seems, and it's very difficult to keep up. It's a challenge, but fun.
I think one of the pleasures in journalism is that you're always learning, whether it's a new story or a new technology. So I seem to always be looking up the learning curve. It's the way it feels. I guess the best answer for me would be about 2 months after I left a lifetime in newspapering to go into radio, Sandy hit, and it was an immense challenge for all of us, probably in different ways, certainly for our newsroom. For me, I learned the degree to which my experience in newspapering transferred to this new medium, and I learned the ways it didn't, but mostly, was pleasantly surprised to see a lesson that I think we all learn, which is that people rise to challenges.
It's interesting. So far, it's all kind of recent. I was thinking it might have been the first job out of college where everything is new, but how about for you, Mark?
Mine's old. My greatest learning curve has nothing to do with technology or the practice of journalism. It has to do with being a boss. And I went from being a writer and a columnist, I was a sports columnist at the New York Post and a feature writer at the Ledger. And then suddenly one day I was asked to be an editor, and I started out as the editor of the features department at the Star Ledger with a staff of 6 or 7. And then became the editor of all the bureaus at the paper with a staff of 80. And to learn how to effectively manage people, to protect their egos, to protect my own integrity in that process. And what I thought was the neatest thing about it was I began to have to vocalize all the things that I intrinsically knew. And it made me a better writer and a better editor as a boss than when I was working in an isolated capacity.
Mine was, I suppose, CNN, because we were trying something brand new, which is happening again right now. It's like the third iteration of this, where we were going to be the first 24-hour-a-day newscast all over the world. How were we going to get enough information in? How are we going? And what it taught me to parse everything down into small compartments. The first video that comes in, the first sound that comes in, and where you put it together and how you build the whole package. And I decided then that the audience deserves to know how the sausage gets made, what our process is. And you should know the thinking that goes into particularly difficult editorial decisions. There are those decisions every single day that are controversial. And that process of breaking everything down and then putting it back together again helped me through single motherhood with 3 girls. So there.
We'd like to now turn the table a little bit and think about democracy in the 21st century, a self-governed society in the 21st century. In news, we hear a lot about issues, which are points of debate. But if we're looking at society as a whole, and this is just one question in this second portion, what, in your view, are 2 of the most urgent challenges that are facing all citizens in America today? That is, all of us, including journalists. Mary Alice, why don't you start?
Getting people to vote. When you don't vote, you get Ferguson, Missouri. When you don't vote, you believe the people who say, we've got to get the government out of our lives. We're the government. We're the government. And that's been lost somehow in this, in the talking head blah blah sphere. I call it the blah blah sphere. But that, I mean, I'm all for too many points of view and a collision, a clash of ideas. That's part of journalism, but it shouldn't be all of journalism. So I think the biggest, you've asked me the two biggest challenges, I'll just give you one. It's voting. It's remembering that that everybody up here knows this one by heart. Thomas Jefferson at the Continental Congress said, were he given the choice between a government without newspapers and newspapers without a government, he would absolutely prefer the latter, because he thought an educated public was more important than the people who govern them. We are the government.
What she said. I'm not sure I can top that.
That would be absolutely impossible to top, so I'll go along with that. I was going to say a lack of civility and a lack of people actually listening to each other and actually paying attention to what people are saying instead of demonizing and dismissing.
That deserves applause. So we had a meeting early last week in our office thinking about what we would do to add a distinctive flavor to our coverage of the 2016 election. And John Hockenberry, who's the host of The Takeaway on WNYC, had his Howard Beale moment where he basically said, you know, we need to focus our attention on the disenfranchised in all these different ways. And he mentioned the literally disenfranchised people who are convicted of felonies and don't get their vote back, which is, you know, disproportionately black people in America and in New York and New Jersey. But then we went on to talk about that in some ways, a thing that unites people in New York and pretty much New Jersey and Oklahoma and Wyoming is that the candidates don't care about us during a presidential election. If you're in a blue state or a red state, you don't matter. 4 years ago, well, it'll be almost 4 years ago, in 2012, we focused, like a lot of people did, on the swing states. Well, everybody focuses on the swing states. Why don't we grab back the elections for the rest of us and perhaps turn the tide by saying we do matter? So we're going to be working on various ways to do that in 2016.
Last year, when the Super Bowl came to New Jersey, I was forced to go to Media Day, and really forced. And there were 2,500 media members covering Media Day. If we had that many people covering Congress, we wouldn't have any problems in this country. And no, we don't. No, we really don't. We don't have that many people covering Congress, not with any real oomph. The problem that we have is a lack of transparency in government, and the real reason we have that problem is because journalism has quit on it, by and large. We have given up the fight to, as Mary Alice said, to make sure that you realize the government is you and give people those voices. And I think that is what the role of journalism in this country should be, what it was intended to be, the protector of the individual rights and of the first 7 amendments of the Bill of Rights. And we have gone so far away from that as an industry, it's almost unrecognizable. And maybe some people up here will disagree with that. I mean, we all do the best we can, but as an industry, it's getting sillier and sillier.
So if we were to just follow up on that question and step outside of journalism, which we're very concerned with tonight, and just think of the citizenry, what would be your second biggest challenge that all citizens face? Is there a way to kind of think besides that?
The biggest challenge I think that we face is getting civics taught back in the schools. Now, George Washington wasn't as eloquent as Thomas Jefferson, but he was a pretty smart guy. And he really, and you know, in his farewell address to the nation, he talked about educating the population in the science of government. And somewhere along the line, the teaching of civics has dropped out of our public schools. And so we don't have kids who even understand how their town council works, or whether they have a town council or a town committee in town, vice versa, you know, whatever. So I think that's a big challenge, to get the population sort of retrenched in the understanding of the government.
Actually, I'm going to disagree with you. New Jersey is tied for second in the number of students we graduate from public high schools in our state. And our civics courses in the public schools are really terrific. All three of my daughters were in the Civics and Government Institute within Montclair High and competed in Washington with students from all over the country in debates about the Federalist Papers and James Madison. It's really quite well taught, and New Jersey does really well here. I worry about the kids in Texas who have textbooks that show that humans coexisted with dinosaurs, and who have really, seriously, and who have lifted science out of their textbooks. That's a bigger concern to me.
I think what we've lost is sort of the shared sense of not sacrifice is the wrong word, but the idea that we're all in this together, that, you know, me having some benefit is not taking food out of your mouth kind of thing. And I think there's too much of this is my little thing and we've got to defend this, and this is my little thing. And the reality is, again, if we all wind up defending our own little piece of the pie, nobody's going to have any pie at the end of the day. If we can't make hard decisions about what kind of government benefits or what kind of government programs, then there's not going to be anything left for anybody. And I think that's the part, and it goes back to almost your piece about discourse and being able to talk about problems as opposed to finger pointing and that sort of thing. I think that would be the thing to me that I would add.
Okay, I'll echo that, and I think what's really important too is civics for adults. I do see a kind of a lack of information that people have, and a lack of true understanding. Maybe we're all too busy. Maybe in media we're not doing the best job that we can. But I do see a lack of understanding of the admittedly very difficult and complex issues. You know, to understand New Jersey's budget crisis requires a great deal of knowledge that I think that sometimes people are just not getting.
There's just too many things we don't talk about. I think it's been obvious. You invoked Ferguson. There is grappling with the legacy of racism in our country that if we could unpack a lot more effectively, I think we would learn a lot about each other. We would get to the root of important problems. We would lift up the issues that policymakers need to wrestle with and voters need to vote about. There's a lot of class that gets tied up in that, and sometimes the economics are more important than the socio end of the socioeconomics. But I think there's a world of work that we all need to do to sort of confront reality a little bit more effectively than we do.
We now have a chance to fast forward 15 years and imagine some hypotheticals and then figure out just what happened that we got there. And the first one happens to be that voter participation rate in New Jersey skyrocketed to 85% in the recent election. So what is it that caused that to happen, Mark?
Chris Christie got to run again.
Okay. Marielle.
Answer a question. The only way voting participation would go to that level scares me. Whether there's starvation and,
That's what I was going to say.
Famine, poverty, getting people off their rear ends. We're very complacent as a society everybody complains about, the economy and this and that, but, you don't see that many empty restaurants. Yankee tickets are $150 a seat, and people fill the stadium. So I think as long as there's this kind of complacency, let me amend that. If you want to see the voting, interest go back up, bring back the draft. Because as long as we don't have a draft, and as long as other people's sons and daughters are fighting our wars, we can be disengaged from what the war machine of this country is doing and what the foreign policy of this country is doing around the world. If you bring back the draft, suddenly we all have to be a little bit more interested in our globalism. And as a military veteran, this is an especially sore point with me. Other people's children and husbands and wives are fighting that war. So I think that's one way to get the voting numbers up.
The thing I worry about is income disparity. The last time that the haves and the have-nots were separated by this large a gap was in the run-up to the Great Depression. And the robber barons, James J. Hill and Morgan and all those people J.P. Morgan saved us, actually, by agreeing to be taxed at 92%. I am not suggesting for a moment that the 1% of 1% be taxed at 92%. But I do think if the broad mass of people in America can't get jobs, if our children can't afford to live where they're going to be employed, we got a problem. And it's not going to get better until somebody addresses it. I'm not making any suggestions.
I don't have anything as thoughtful as these two people. I will just say that the way to do it is I win the Powerball lottery, and then I pay people in New Jersey to go vote. It's just a very simple process.
Oh, boy. This is tough. I'm not sure that I have anything so erudite to contribute. I do remember actually learning a very cynical theory when I studied government, or civics, if you will, in college. And this was espoused, some of you may have heard of Almond and Verba. Anyway, they were the big experts on government and civics. And they said, interestingly enough, that you didn't want that high a voter participation rate. Now, I've quite forgotten why they said it, but I just thought I would bring it up.
Because the peasants will vote.
One approach that works in other places is mandatory voting.
Right.
So, if we can mandate car insurance, maybe we could mandate voting.
Sorry. So nobody suggested that the news media could just remind us that there's an election coming up. But anyway, okay.
I have a
Good.
suggestion on what I was really thinking, which is kind of along the Powerball lines, is that if everybody called up during the pledge drive and gave us their credit card at WNYC, then we could do more journalism that got the word out.
Okay, touche. Okay, all right. Next hypothetical. Got a dream here.
Right. So if we fast forwarded and we said some of the environmental issues that we're facing today that we see as being sort of dire and very, very challenging are in a much better state, perhaps, let's say, climate change, for one, has changed, and we're not so concerned about it. What would it have been that would have happened that would have changed that reality?
Terry, how about you?
Sure. Well, I think the curve is starting to bend a little bit in the right direction. I will say that I think, not that it isn't an issue, because clearly it is, I think the prognosticators in any subject matter are generally have a 50-50 chance of being right or wrong. And I think there are a lot of stories over the course of my career where everyone predicted one thing was going to happen and something else completely different happened. So I think there's a very large likelihood that some amount of the reporting on what the long-term effects of climate change will be is probably not accurate. Having said that, I think it's entirely possible that, with minor changes, good things will happen, and it's equally possible that with major changes, nothing will happen. And I don't think any of us know the answer there.
But you can rely on the science of what's already happened. The scientists, environmental scientists, say that if we stopped everything, turned off all the lights, stopped driving cars, and stopped absolutely everything, the Earth could heal itself in 30 years. Just the planet has this, the oceans have the way of doing that. In California, they're now paying people $7,000 to buy a hybrid car, and then paying $750 for them to put a charging station in their garage. And already the smog control in Los Angeles is better, and that's been about 5 years now, 7 years, I'm not sure, I'd have to check, but fairly recently. We as the human animal on this planet, working together, if we got China in, if we got India in, if we were all in agreement on some of these standards, we could go a long way toward making the environment better.
I just want to say something about the role of the media in this. So WNYC has got a news partnership with NBC New York, with Channel 4. And last year, together we did a week-long series about climate change that was specifically looking at what the models said New York City would be like in 2050. And as part of that, Janice Huff, the chief meteorologist at Channel 4, went and spoke to some climate scientists for a piece that she did on the television. And they told us afterwards that no local TV news person had ever come to talk to them. So I think one of the things that media can do is by cross-pollinating one another to sort of alter the expectations about what media can do. Janice has now been in our studios a number of times talking about these topics. Just a few years ago, you may have read in the New Yorker that meteorologists, local weathercasters, were some of the biggest climate change deniers. So I think that there's possibilities of change around.
Mm-hmm. So let's say in 15 years, the nation's health is improved. The health metrics are improved. And again, this is the citizenry, general citizenry. So if we imagine that heart disease, cancer rates are down, let's suggest what is it that citizens did? What changes did we make that brought about that improvement?
Smoking, obesity, vaccinations.
What she said. I think as long as the country refuses to deal with the issue of whether you want universal health care or not, but some plan that allows people who don't have income to have some sort of medical support, we're not going to make that improvement. So I think we're at a place in time where if the Supreme Court rules against the Affordable Care Act, then that's going to collapse, and we're going to be back where we were.
Well, sitting, I understand, is going to be the new smoking. I kind of, in sort of in a kind of a fantasy land, I think that the wellness movement really takes hold, and people become interested in what they can do to help themselves feel better. And I think a lot of these modalities that you're seeing arise really start to take hold, and people start to feel better, and maybe, I don't know, maybe Bloomberg becomes president or somebody like him, and people become less focused on the bad things.
I would say this is an area where technology has some huge implications, that what you can count is what you deal with. And if you have a Fitbit or something like that, or if you're about to have an Apple Watch when those come out, and whatever in 5 and 10 years, the next iteration of that is we're going to see our health behaviors in our face. I mean, I suppose the bathroom scale could have been doing this job for many, many years.
But who has a bathroom scale?
But there's going to be more that could, by being aware, that's a role that journalism can play too. We can focus attention on those new numbers that we'll see in front of us.
So let's remember that we're like fast forwarding, like we're 15 years ahead here, because otherwise I'd be going after full disclosure. But let's say your own home and all the homes in your neighborhood are sustainably, ecologically efficient, and carbon neutral. So what's new and different in the way in which homes have been being managed? And we're looking beyond efficient light bulbs and recycling.
Everybody's looking at the ceiling. Would anybody like to imagine? Oh, Kate.
Yes. I think actually that the interior designers and the manufacturers of America have united in favor of coming up with energy efficient products. And we did something very interesting at the magazine. We had a panelist of design winners, and we asked them to talk about the trends that they saw in home design and in architecture and in office building design. And to a woman, well, there was one man there, to a person, they talked about responsibility. And that in that industry, they're really starting to take the point of view that it's part of their job to be responsible citizens and to know how to specify. Their view was that the manufacturers of America were a little bit slower to catch up with that, but the manufacturers, they felt, were feeling the impact of demand, particularly from millennial consumers, which have spent a lifetime being taught in school about environmentalism. So they really see that we're on the cusp of some really exciting changes. So I see hope for the future.
Great. Thank you. We have come to our last 2 questions. For now, we're going to ask you to dream once more. You know, it's hard to get journalists who are doing the truth and the facts to dream, but we really want you to do this and think now, again, hypothetically, of what news might be. So, assuming 3 things. You have no worries or pressures regarding competition, ratings, advertising, sponsors, or fundraising. No worries. Your market surveys show you that the public is interested in everything and will tune in, keep tuning in no matter what you do. And you have all the audience you need every day, week, and month. So if this is the case, what subject areas would you include in your newscasts or publications that you currently do not include? And what are the kinds of stories and topics that you would love to cover? So Mary Alice is smiling. I'm going to...
Actually, I don't have a direct answer to that. I mean, I have 30 minutes, and it's 30. There are no commercials. We have 5 subjects we cover every single night, and if you think about it, every single story can get shoved through these 5: education, economics, environment, health, and the arts. And all of our stories go through those. So, yeah, I can't think of any other answer.
Your turn.
I would say I'm a little blessed because where I am right now, we have a lot of those things. And so where we try to focus, to some of what Mark was saying earlier, are the disenfranchised people, the people who are not, who don't really have a voice in our society. And honestly, I think regardless of whether any of those things happen, that's really our obligation anyway. And that's what we really should be doing. And the beauty is that we don't have to worry about whether, you know, we're outrating ABC News or CBS or whatever. You know, it's like, let's go cover the stories we should be covering anyway.
It's hard to answer that question because New Jersey Monthly is a general interest publication, so pretty much anything that happens in New Jersey is fair game. So there might be some things we would do differently. We'd probably do a deeper take on politics. We'd probably do more of the stories that people don't necessarily expect from us. some of the more serious dives into politics and the intricacies of scientific developments in New Jersey. That's hard for us to get across to a general audience. We might be franker about race, to Jim's point, perhaps also about religion.
I guess we would unleash Brian Lehrer to do all Yankees all the time.
Okay. And Mark, you have a special position as a columnist because you kind of can write about everything. But just tell us, if the sky was truly the limit, what would you do?
I think I'd really like to attack the idiocy of social media and the cruelty that is developing in the country. We really have to get a hold of. And I think mainstream media has been so cowed by, what's new and social media and how do we play ball with it, that we're afraid to stand up and say, this is garbage, a lot of it, and let's lead again and not follow. I work for an organization that's collecting clicks, and we're not leading. We have abdicated our responsibility of editorship to the public. And there's a real downside to that. So if I had my choice of sort of taking some risk-free approach to coverage, it would be to go after that aspect of our society.
We hope you do.
So every day, you have extra time to fill, which is probably something you don't usually have. And that's beyond the top stories, the top issues, and key investigations. So in that larger, kind of civic open space, what would you say is the essential purpose for the news?
Wow. I think it's hard, honestly, to top afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted as a principle. That if we could do that each day, I'd feel good.
I would say that the purpose of the news is to inform about the things that are important and to focus less on the ephemera. I think in news and in journalism as a whole, we're very focused on the ephemera, what's new, what's hot, who the biggest stars are, and sometimes I think we're all lacking a little bit of what's really important. What will we care about 50 years from now?
Terry.
I don't know, was the dress white and gold or blue and black? That's all I want to know. And I agree totally with Jim.
The purpose of all journalism is to help people decide. Covering fires and murders doesn't help people decide. I thought the dress was fun and white and gold.
Everyone knows that.
But I'm sitting next to a woman behind me at WNET who says it's blue and black. She swears it, I don't know. But the junko vision that is often an excuse for local news doesn't help people decide anything.
We're in the First Amendment, we're number 2 after religion. The stanchions of the country are freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom, right to assemble. I teach journalism at Rutgers, Newark, and New Brunswick. And when I go in and ask my kids about the Bill of Rights, none of them know what it is. And in all deference to Montclair education, I've had 6 kids go through the vaunted Mountain Lakes and Madison school systems, and none of them took a civics course. So this idea that we don't understand government, we don't understand how it works, and we don't even understand the role of the press in the country anymore is alarming to me. And I think that to me is the thing I'd like to see.
Okay, well, we'd like to open up the floor to questions from the audience. There's so much that could be talked about, from the backgrounds of this wonderful panel to the issues they've brought up. And we don't want you to be shy, but just come forward and speak into the microphone.
the early question about voting throughout this country, not just in New Jersey, districts have been gerrymandered so that there are safe districts for so many people. But if we could reduce the gerrymandering and make elections a little more competitive, people would be more excited and vote, I would think. And I'd like to know whether you feel there's a role for you guys going.
Gerrymandering won't change. If we could reduce the money it takes to run,
well, that's
then
true.
The gerrymandering wouldn't matter.
Can I tell you a little story? So at WNYC, we decided during the midterms we would try and run an experiment to see if we could affect voting. And we picked one election district in the Bronx where there were 1,000 people on the rolls, 250 of whom had not participated in 4 straight elections. Right. And we ran a campaign to get them to vote. We went and knocked on their doors. We put leaflets under their porch doors. We had Brian Lehrer record robocalls, and we robocalled into their houses. We increased turnout by 10%. Now that was a tiny little experiment in one place. So gerrymandering aside, if you raise the turnout to 85%, which I believe is the objective in 15 years, you would get different electoral results. So that's what we got to work on.
We have 5 minutes and 5 questions, so just quick and 1 minute each.
I wanted to ask the two of you, both Mr. Baker and Ms. Williams, the outlets that you were at had at some point a perception issue. Other than PR and advertising, what do you think was the turning point that allowed your new perception to be a successful one?
It was an event. It really, if there's an event that you cover like a fumble that nobody else can touch you on, that's going to be. It was the first Iraq War for CNN. So there was no one else in Tripoli except us.
Okay.
I think it's doing good work for a long period of time. It's, CNN was around for a long time, just doing the work. And I'm convinced. I mean, Al Jazeera has a much bigger perception problem than CNN ever had. As long as we're in the game, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, when 85% of the people are voting, I think people will. I think that same 85% will think Al Jazeera is the news I want to watch.
I'm happy to be a proponent. I absolutely love it as a journalist. So thank you so much.
You guys have had all sorts of different experiences in the media. You've seen models change. You've seen things evolve. And so I'm wondering, assume you're around 5 years from now. What have you done differently to get you there? How's your business changed? And what do you hope your brand is?
Why do you always do that?
That's your sword today.
What's happening now is that instead of sending reporters out to do stories that are going to go on the news tonight, we are in the process right now of trying to flip that. Terry, you might be ahead of me, so that it goes on the web first. And that sounds simpler than it is. And the other part of your question was, and why is it going to work? Because we're telling the truth, we're engaging the audience in how we go through the process so that we get your help and input, and we are telling you when we make mistakes and correcting them immediately with a great big word that says correction at the top.
And your brand in 5 years would be?
The best news on television.
While we want to be destinations, we also need to distribute ourselves as another great word to use in church, promiscuously as possible. You need to be everywhere. That is the power of social media, whatever its shortcomings are, that it allows you to kind of find your way to people who didn't know that you existed. Somebody from the Huffington Post is quoted in this famous New York Times innovation report that circulated a few months ago, saying that our job doesn't end when we hit publish, it just begins when we hit publish. And I think we're all learning that we have to kind of build the audience for our best work, and we work really hard where I am to make sure that it's not just the people who already tune into WNYC who hear about an important story when we've got it. jump in?
I just had a thought, and this is so on its head for me, I wouldn't have thought of this, but my daughters were talking on a Sunday night about how excited they were because tomorrow was Monday and their podcast was going to come. And this conversation went on, and I said, stop, what podcast? And they said, it's this new thing called This American Life. That's how they're doing it.
Right. Well, and I think the other thing is that all of us were in slightly different places, but we're all running into the same spaces. Right. So radio, you used to only have radio. Now you're doing stuff online. We're now, we have a TV network and a website, and now my new project, which is Project Marconi, is doing podcasts. So, we're all going to, in 5 years, we're all going to be much more in each other's business in a way. So I think that's going to be kind of a major change for everybody. We have to learn how to do more different things.
So if you're a high school student, what should you be studying to get into your business?
Learn how to write. Then civics, right. No, seriously, the one thing that I think more kids should learn how to do is write. Everything we do is based on the written word. So if you can't write...
Everything we do is based on writing, absolutely. And one of the things I see, while we're all trying to be like each other, certainly the written word is suffering. We're losing that depth and muscularity of prose. And I'd like to see some of the great American broadcast outlets develop that more, have a columnist on NBC.com and things like that to try to get people reading more across the board.
I'd jump in on that. Writing obviously is fundamental. The thing that's hard for us to grasp is that writing is a little bit different depending upon your medium. And we are all playing in each other's sandbox these days. And I would say that one of the things that we want to do at New Jersey Monthly is to one day be able to tell the story in the medium or mediums that are most appropriate for that particular story, to get beyond, online first necessarily. The second thing I'll mention, since it seems to me, since I majored in economics and I'm a publisher, I should address the financial aspect, which is we need to engage our advertisers when we have advertisers. I know not all of you do.
Oh, we do too.
In a way that encompasses all their advertising needs, puts together integrated marketing packages. I know that's really a cliche, but that's what we need to be able to do in order to survive.
One last question.
So what is the role of local government in getting people more engaged and more involved in participating in civic life?
I think if our governments could do a better job of being open with information so that we're able to find out everything in the police blotter without any pause, or in the tax collections without any pause, or in the at the state level in the governor's meeting agenda that he won't let us know who he meets with. If that stuff was all public, then we could all work on top of that with layers of information that would inform people, get people involved, get the community activated, because there'd be more grist for our mills.
I'd also like to mention that there's a great nonprofit called the Citizens Campaign in New Jersey that teaches citizens the skills of becoming involved on local committees in local government and empowering them to do that. Well, this has been a terrific discussion. I just want to offer very, very deep thanks to our fantastic panel, to Jim, Kate, Terry, Mary Alice, and Mark. Thank you for contributing to Civic Life and Summit, and Janet for Interweave's help and partnerships. It's just been great. And Hometown TV, we appreciate you being here as well.
And thank you, Susan, for providing leadership for all
Very
of this.
welcome.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks to all.
So a great deal obviously has changed in news and information in the past 10 years. We've just touched on some of that. But what aspects of news and publishing do you particularly enjoy? Let's start with Jim again.
I think telling stories of consequence, for all that has changed, the fundamental and the thing that I think remains in oddly short supply is original reporting. And so working with my colleagues on stories that you wouldn't find out about unless we dug in and told them is incredibly gratifying. I think that the change that's going on in journalism has eaten away at that. So being part of continuing to do that is what I find most gratifying.
I'm in a little bit of a different position here because unlike my esteemed colleagues, I'm kind of not really a working journalist. I spend most of my time being publisher. I enjoy influencing the editorial product, but I think that most of all, I really enjoy working with a talented team. That's enormously gratifying to be able to make that possible and occasionally to make some little suggestions.
Well, you know, in my current role, I'm not really in the day-to-day journalism world, although I stick my nose in a lot of places where it isn't technically part of my job. But I think what I've always enjoyed most is the opportunity to learn things myself, as well as hopefully educate the larger public. I think that's the fundamental calling that we all do, and I still think that's a really critical part of our society and the thing that I really like doing. It's we get the first draft of history, and that's really great to be a part of that.
Yeah, it's the story. We all love telling stories. That's why we're in this. And I love working now with a bunch of younger people, watching them learn how to do that in a way that captures you, that engages you, and that makes everybody think just a little bit bigger. There's a fire down the street. Who cares? The one thing that they have now written in the newsroom is, why should I care? Because my first anchor, the guy who made me an anchor, Tom Snyder, crazy man from WNYC, if you remember him, used to yell at me, why should I care? And man, did I ever learn how to write that first sentence so that he would. And so working with young people is fun.
What they all said is really not much to add. It's all that. It's the story, giving some voice to the voiceless, and the other cliches we use, shining light in dark places. I think the human interest story, the story of the workaday person's struggle in this life is something that's really been lost in journalism. We're so fixated on celebrities and sports and entertainment and all the things that take us outside of our own humanity that I find still great reward in telling the simple stories about regular people.